Hi, this is Dr. Kimberley Linert, author of Visualizing Happiness in Every Area of Your Life and the host of this podcast. And today, my guest is John Livesay. Now, John Livesay, aka the Pitch Whisperer, is an incredible keynote speaker. His TEDx talk, Be the Lifeguard of Your Own Life, has over 1 million views and was featured on Larry King's show. He has an innate ability to motivate company sales teams to turn mundane case studies into compelling case stories so they win more business. From John's award-winning career at Conde Nast, he shares the lessons he learned. His book, The Sale is in the Tail, is a business fable set in Austin, Texas, and is about a sales representative whose old ways of selling are not working anymore. The reader accompanies the rep on his journey and learns how to use storytelling and strengthen their soft skills to improve their professional and personal relationships. Welcome to the podcast, John.
Thanks, Dr. Kimberly.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have this interview with you. And I actually found you because I read your book. I'm like, oh, he needs to be on the podcast so you can tell more people how to sell through relationships.
And stories. Yes,
And
exactly.
stories. Exactly. So just so people can get to know who you are, tell us about you, how you started out, how you get to be doing what you're doing now.
Well, I majored in advertising when I was in college many years ago, and I was fascinated by what motivated people to take action or change behavior. And there's a whole psychology behind it, and what made one commercial memorable versus another. And I realized the commercials that tell stories are the ones that we feel touches our heart and we have an emotional connection to the brand. And then I had a successful selling career at Conde Nast, which is brands like GQ and Vogue and Vanity Fair and Architectural Digest. And the clients I would call on, like Lexus, would say, we looked at 15 different titles. We've narrowed it down to 10. We're going to pick 3. And you each get to come in for 30 minutes and pitch why we should pick you, but don't talk about numbers. Well, half of the reps were deer in headlights. Don't talk about circulation or the reader's income. What am I going to talk about? And I realized then that whoever told the best story was the one that got the sale. And that's what started me on this journey. And I would start giving talks to my advertiser sales teams, whether it was a car company sales team or a jewelry company or a fashion company. And that's what started my 15-year ago speaking career, speaking to the advertiser sales teams. So the ad that they would run in my magazine would drive traffic to the store or the dealership, and then my talk would help them close more sales by teaching them how to tell stories. And then from there, I have been doing that now ever since. And it's a fascinating jump into different industries. I tend to speak to a lot of tech companies and healthcare companies who are very knowledgeable about their products, but they don't know how to tell a story that makes people remember or care.
Mm-hmm. Well, that makes sense, especially, some of the things where, you're selling software and you're trying to compare this software to that software and trying to make it special. And
Right.
that's quite a feat, I think, to try and make a story around that.
Yes, I think there's 3 big stories that everyone should have in their toolbox. The first one is your own story of origin. If you're in the computer business or the healthcare business or a lawyer or doctor, whatever it is you do, ideally you can have a story of why you got into that and why you're passionate about it. For example, I was helping an architecture team with a pitch, and they have a team slide, and it was pretty dry. Like, I've been here this many years, I worked in this office, that office, etc. But instead, one gentleman said, well, when I was 11 years old, I played with Legos. Now I have a son that's 11. I still play with Legos. I have that same passion I did as a kid for architecture. Well, that gives us a sense of who that person is. And that's a great way to establish rapport with people, have them tell you their story of origin. So that's the first part. Then the second part is, what's the company's story? Even if it's your own one-person company, how'd you come up with the name? What are the values? Not how many offices you have, but what is it that made you want to start this company? People love a story about a company. When I was speaking at the Coca-Cola Summit for their CMOs who sell Coca-Cola, I met the chief marketing officer at Aunt Anne's Pretzels. And I said, oh, these are on malls and airports. How did this all start? Oh, well, she started selling pretzels at one farmer's market, and now look at it.
Mhm.
So that little story makes you feel like, oh, this is the American dream come to life.
Mhm.
And then, as you mentioned in my introduction, it's really taking testimonials and case studies and turning those into stories that people can remember and that pull you in and that they want to go on the journey with you.
Exactly. And I can resonate with that one. So my background is I'm a behavioral optometrist.
Mhm.
So when I had a therapy center, um, once I showed them the price, which was a good price,
Yeah.
people were a little shocked whenever they saw the price of the programs. I would pull out my book of all the testimonials of
Yes.
all the people who had done well and their life is better. And I would actually have the client read them. I want you to read this one. Okay. This one's like
Uh-huh.
your kid. I want you to read this one. And it
Right.
was the testimonials, not my personal story, but actually the stories of those
Mhm. Yes.
patients that helped those people through the part where they had to come up with the money and get, the care.
Right. Well, what you're doing there is you're picking the right story, like a jukebox or a playlist. So you
Hmm.
want to have multiple stories ready to go, and
Right.
you have a story that person, this sounds like your kid. And so
Hmm.
about the same age, same challenges and struggles. Bosch and Loam brought me in to speak to their sales team. And so as part of that preparation, I interviewed optometrists. And they said, so many of the reps, no matter what they're selling, come in, they all say the same thing. That, our product does this, this, and this. And um, it's all data. And I could look up the data. Very few people come in and tell me a story. And what Bosch and Lum does is they not only help me with products, but they help me with my practice. So I
Hmm.
had someone working here move out of town, and I had an opening, and they had said, "Oh, someone else in my territory has someone who does that job moving to this neighborhood. You might want to interview her." So that trusted advisor role,
Hmm.
that story, um, makes you more than just a vendor of what all that comes about. So when you're telling those case stories, a good story should have four parts. There should be an exposition where you paint the picture, the who, what, where, when,
Hmm.
and then you have a problem. And here, the better you are at describing the problem, the better they think you probably have their solution. And
Hmm.
so the stakes have to be high in order for the story to be interesting or relevant. Can't just be, well, they were going along and it would be nice to maybe get this, but they didn't really need it. No, no, things got really bad that they needed to make a change and they just didn't know what it was going to require. And then the solution, and then the final and fourth step that most people don't have is the resolution. What is life like for this person after they bought your product or service? And they're happier, the whole family is happier in your case. Imagine if the Wizard of Oz ended when Dorothy got in the balloon and went home to Kansas, the end. But no, there's this wonderful resolution where she's in bed going, oh, there's no place like home. And you were there. And I appreciate so much what everyone does and who they are. And that's why that story is a classic. So if you start having those four parts, exposition, problem, solution, and resolution in your case stories, you're going to tug at heartstrings and get that emotional connection that make people want to buy from you.
Hmm. Exactly. Now, when it comes to selling, we've had a, change. A lot of times we used to sell in print, and then we have the internet, then we have in
Yeah.
person, then now we have videos we can send people. Is there a better way to sell? Is it always still
Oh,
better one-on-one? And is it efficient?
I believe it is that you can never, that's why they bring me into live events now that we can have live events again after the pandemic. There's no substitute for that nonverbal communication that you have with someone,
Mhm.
and you can read the room. It's a little hard to read the Zoom.
Yes, it is.
uh, and it's efficient if what you're selling has a high price point. It's probably not efficient to sell chewing gum face to face, but
Mhm.
if you have a high ticket item, yes, because you need to develop that relationship and um, have a sense of what's going on in the place and get them. Like if you're selling a home, Most people don't buy a home without seeing it face to face. Most people want to take a test drive of a car before they buy something. So it's the same thing in everything. The more hands-on, in-person connection we can have, and videos are great, but it's a great storytelling tool. But you can't depend on the fact that it's a video to sell for you. You must be telling a story in that video that makes people want to share it.
Exactly. So I know just from my experience, people come in and they want to sell like a piece of equipment, like a new camera or something like that. But there's 3 guys selling 3 different cameras. How does the salesman that wants to make that sale, how do they differentiate themselves? How do they, and also with the limited time, because a lot of times I know physicians are busy, so it's hard to get face time with them. So how do you stand out?
I think you need to make your story 3 things. It has to be clear, concise, and compelling. I call it the 3 C's. If it's not clear and you're using a bunch of acronyms, or if you're trying to sell a camera, all the different apertures and numbers and tech stuff, people get confused. They get overwhelmed. They just say no, it's too hard. Then it needs to be concise. And the reason it needs to be concise is not just the limited time you have in front of the buyer, but you want them to be able to remember and repeat your story to somebody else that might be a decision maker. And then finally, compelling, and there's where the heartstrings get involved. It has to have some emotional hook. If you're just buying something based on logic, again, back to the camera, it'll take great pictures, the resolution will be this and blah, blah, blah. I worked with Olympus Medical, the camera company that makes medical equipment. And they said, we have this piece of equipment that, is a resolution monitor during surgeries. And it's 4K and, but it's very expensive. And the objection they kept getting was, it's a lot of money for a rural hospital if we're not going to use it every surgery. We're not sure. So I worked with them, and now they tell this story. Imagine how happy Dr. Higgins was in Minnesota testing out this 4K resolution monitor. And they had Blake, the salesperson, in the surgery in case the doctor had questions. They were operating on a patient that was overweight. And because of that, there's a lot of risks. And the doctor hit a bleeder, and there was an audible gasp in the operating room because to the naked eye, it's a sea of red. Now, how is this doctor going to find the source of the bleeder to save the patient's life? And the doctor calmly looked up at the monitor, and he could see the subtle colors in red between oxygenated blood and non-oxygenated blood. And that allowed him to find the source of the bleeder and save the patient's life. And the doctor turned to the rep and said, we don't always need a monitor like this, but boy, when we need it, we need it. And now that rep tells that story to other doctors who see themselves in the story and say, ooh, I don't care if I need this 1 out of 100 or 1,000 patients. I don't want to be having a morbidity issue because I didn't have a monitor to help me in those situations. So we put the objection in the story in that case, which allows people to feel. And again, the hero of the story is the doctor, not the rep. The rep is like the Sherpa that helps them climb Mount Everest. And other doctors see themselves in that story.
Yeah, they sure do. Because, like you said, if you're just talking about the details about the piece of equipment, no one really cares.
Yeah.
What I want to know is, am I going to catch that thing that I wouldn't have caught if I didn't have that piece of equipment and quickly and efficiently?
Right. Yeah. So, our naked eye can't see subtle colors in red like that. But then that lets you know where the problem is. So yeah, it's the stakes are high, it's clear, it's concise, and it's compelling.
Now, just to switch gears a little, so let's say that you're actually selling to consumers. Is there a difference in how you sell to B2B as opposed to consumers?
No, stories still work for either one. So let's use the example. I've been hired by Berkshire Hathaway Home Services to come in and be their speaker on how they should convince people to pick them to list their house. And that's very much a consumer decision. usually made by, more than one person, unless that person is single. And it's the real estate person that presents a story of, your family has outgrown this house, or reminds me of another family that's outgrown this house. But this house is perfect for a starter family. And I just sold one down the block last month. And so I know exactly how to target this type of buyer. And I know, all the tricks of the trade, like having an apple pie in the oven when they walk in, they start visualizing themselves having their first baby here, and this would be the nursery. And you paint that picture of, exactly who's going to buy this house. Maybe the person's more concerned with the negotiation. So then you have a story about that, right? We want to list this house. We want multiple offers. Well, I know exactly what my strategy is. That's what we did 6 months ago down, in your neighborhood, that did generate multiple offers. Or, interest rates are high right now. A lot of people are hesitant to buy. And we make this house so compelling that this is a long-term investment. And you're not trying to time the market all the time, that regardless of, you can always refinance. And, you have stories to handle every particular concern that somebody might have.
And if you're new in sales or new in your company, let's say you don't have the stories, do you just use other people's stories? Or
Yes, absolutely. And even if you've been there for a while, but you don't have a story that fits that particular niche, you can still say, well, my colleague, Dr. Kimberley, did X, Y, and Z. And so it's about the story being a good fit for who you're talking to. And, as long as you credit who the story is and don't pretend it's yours, it's totally fine.
Okay. And talking about stories, I've heard when people do sales that you want to kind of know what the person's personality is that you're talking to. There's kind of those 4 basic types, regardless of what they call them.
Yeah.
There's almost always like 4 basic types.
Uh-huh.
Do you change your story based on that as you're reading people?
Well, I remember one of the mistakes I made early in my career. I was talking to a buyer, and I said something like, does this feel like something you'd like to do? And she got very upset. I don't make my decisions based on feelings. The numbers have to make sense. I was like, whoops, sorry. Where somebody else who's more kinesthetic is very much about their gut and things like that. So yes, there's something called neuro-linguistic programming, where you tap into the different languages to use. And if you're not sure who you're talking to, or in my case, when I speak to hundreds of people, I have to incorporate all of that, because each person in that audience is a different way. So I was working with a company that works with cognitive impairment, people who have dementia or Alzheimer's, and convincing people to put their loved one in those facilities versus another facility. It's still sales. And we were working on a case story about that. And I said, oh, there was this woman named Irene. She was 84. When she first came here, the sound of her head hitting the table created a very loud thud. And we thought to ourselves, oh my gosh, how depressed must she feel that she doesn't even want to look up and see what's going on in the room? So that's auditory, that's kinesthetic with feeling, and it's visual, that she doesn't want to look.
Definitely. So, I could feel all of them and sense all of them.
Yeah. So that's how you incorporate different types of personality into a little description of what that story is. And that's just the beginning of the story.
Now, this storytelling, we could use it in our day-to-day life, even with other people in our family, our friends.
Yes.
What is the most beneficial way to use that as far as just creating closeness?
Well, one of my favorite examples of that is I had an orthopedic surgeon who had launched a new company, and he was engaging me to help him with his pitch and his story. And so he learned those 4 parts that we talked about, the exposition, etc. And he had a 7-year-old daughter who said, Daddy, tell me a story, bedtime story. He goes, okay, well, let's read Goodnight Moon again. No, don't read. Tell me a story. And he said, oh, normally I would panic. And then I remembered you taught me the structure of a story, and that it's important to make the story where someone sees themselves in it. So I just started making up a story following those parts about another little girl who was my daughter's age, and she loved it. And it made me look like a hero to her.
Mhm.
So that's an example of using storytelling in your everyday life.
That is really, really beautiful. So, this comes up whenever we talk about sales, but the person who says, I want to think about it, they're kind of putting you off, but they're kind of interested, but it's
Right.
like it's really hard to know where they're at.
I call that being stuck at the friend zone at work.
Mm.
Fortune and Inc. magazine did a whole article on that one topic with me. We know what the friend zone in dating is, right? That's a kiss of death. And it's the same thing in sales. I'm interested. I'm not sure. I want more time to think about it. And what you need to do is to tell a story that intrigues someone to want to know more. And
Mhm.
then from there, you create the story that makes this situation irresistible, whether it's a timing thing, a shortage thing, or how much longer can you suffer without this solution?
Mhm. Got it. So let's say someone just outright says, no, I don't want this. What does your follow-up look like? Do you continue to
Hmm.
follow up and do you use stories while you're doing that?
Well, I think the first thing we need to address there is how do you feel when you get a no? My big takeaway for everybody is no now doesn't mean no forever.
Hmm.
That person could change jobs, their needs could change, their budget could change. Um, also, not to take rejection personally. When I used to sell advertising and they said, oh, we're going with Vanity Fair instead of W Magazine, I'd be like, oh, maybe another salesperson could have gotten a yes. Or maybe they're right. That magazine's better than my magazine. Don't do that. So never reject yourself and
Hmm.
never reject what you're selling.
Mm.
And, when we're driving in traffic and we get a red light, nobody takes that personally. And yet when we get a red light in business, a no, a rejection, whatever, we can take that personally. And so we have to be as detached for the red light in traffic as we are in our career. And, that's the number one thing. I'd rather have a no than a maybe any day of the week.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have the money, whatever. Let me go on to the next person. And so if you have an abundance mindset,
Mm-hmm.
that there's plenty of people who do need what I have and can afford what I have, and I'm not trying to be everything to all people, then that's just more feedback of you're on the right path.
Exactly. And talking about that abundance mindset, mindset is so important in every area of life, but
Yes.
specifically if you're actually selling something, because you're going to get a lot of no's before you get yeses or
Yep.
maybes or whatever. So, do you have certain morning practices you do or something you do to get your
Yes.
mind in the right place?
I'm really big on a meditation before I check my phone or even get out of bed. And it's a very simple mantra of I'm safe, I'm happy, I'm at peace.
Mm-hmm.
And when you ground yourself, because I was not always feeling that during the pandemic, I was not feeling safe and anxious with, live events ever coming back. And I just moved to Austin and I didn't know many people. And even the people I was supposed to meet, nobody wanted to meet. And so that isolation on top of a move, on top of your business model changing, and, I'm safe. There's no saber-toothed tiger chasing me and
Mm-hmm.
dialing down that anxiety. So if you start, because otherwise, if you just start answering emails in the morning, you're reacting to the world
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to this is who I am. This is what my intention is for the day. Um, I have a dog, so go on our morning walk and I'm as fully present as I can, looking at nature, connecting with nature. There's an abundance of nature, there's an abundance of energy for me and the world. And then I also do a gratitude of everything I'm grateful for. And whatever we focus on, we get more of.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my morning ritual.
Got it. And just kind of an expansion of that question. So, when you look at your work day and how you do your work, you said,
Mhm.
you took time to go for a walk with your dog. How do you put together your day so that you're real productive? while you're working, and
Mm.
how often do you take breaks? How do you make
Yeah.
that maximum?
Well, my whole mantra is if it's not scheduled, it doesn't get done, including a break.
Mm-hmm.
So I try not to book things on top of each other. I have a calendar that I use, and you can put blocks of time for just my time, so people don't make appointments and what have you. But I'm a big believer of the 20/80 rule. When I was selling, I would write down, here are my top 10 clients that generate probably 80% of my revenue. What am I doing every day to make sure they feel seen and heard and appreciated? And then I would write down my top 10 prospects of what can I do to move the needle here. And if somebody became a client, then they move off the prospect list, and are they a big client or not? But I'm constantly going, 20% of my time should be spent, 80% of my time should be spent on that 20%, the
Mm-hmm.
top clients and the top prospects. All the rest is weather, noise, and distractions. And so if you block out here's where I'm prospecting time, because if you are not spending any time marketing or refining what your marketing message is or testing something, then your sales funnel dries up and you're like, oh, I'm busy giving talks, but there's nothing booked past June of this year because I haven't been. So you need to be working on, what am I doing to attract new clients, what am I doing to convert them, and then what am I doing to actually deliver the product, and looking at your time through that lens of, I need to spend 30% of my time on each one of those buckets, so that it all keeps flowing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that, because that is so important, and kind of making your lists, or your,
Mm-hmm.
dividing things where they need to go.
Right.
So, um, so we haven't talked specifically about your book. So you want to
Oh,
talk about your books and a little bit
sure.
about what they're about? And
Yeah, the latest one is called The Sale is in the Tail, TALE. It's a business fable set here in Austin, where I live. So it's a little bit of a love letter to Austin. And it's a story of a salesperson struggling that the old way of selling, of just knowing all the details of the product, aren't working anymore. And someone in his world introduces him to the power of storytelling and how that changes not only his career, but his personal life. And so you're reading a story about storytelling and going on the journey. And then at the very end is the methodology of how to tell great stories, so you can start using it yourself.
Mhm.
And it's funny because people just go, oh, I thought this would happen in the story, but it didn't. And it's, that's a good story because you care enough about the characters to wonder what's going to happen next.
Mhm. Exactly. And then if people actually wanted to work with you, you want to kind of at this
Sure.
point just describe your services, what you have
Oh,
available, and where they contact you?
well, I have a gift for everybody listening, which is if you take out your phone and you text the word pitch, PITCH, to this number, 66866, you get the first chapter of my book for free, to see if that intrigues you enough to want to get the rest of it. And you can also get it on Audible with me narrating if you prefer that. And people can find me on my website, which is just my name, johnlivesay.com. Can't remember my name or the name of my book, just Google The Pitch Whisperer, and all my content shows up that way.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you. So just a personal question,
Hmm.
what gives you the most happiness and fulfillment in your life at this point?
Well, I would say helping as many people as possible get off the self-esteem roller coaster brings me a lot of joy. I was on it. It's
Mhm.
exhausting. I only felt good if things were going well, if my numbers were up, or bad if things were not going well, or I missed a goal, or I got rejected. And so the concept of helping people realize that you're the movie director of your own life, and you can zoom out and say cut at any time and stop playing horror movies in your head about what the future is going to be or reliving the past.
Uh-huh.
Say who I am is bigger than any one thing happening to me. So therefore, I'm not attached to needing this in order to be happy. I'm no longer playing the as soon as this happens, I'll be happy game.
Mm.
I'm happy now. It's a choice. I don't need that job, that car, that relationship to be happy. I'm fit into those genes, whatever the drama is that you put yourself through. I'm like, I'm happy now. This is my choice.
Mhm.
And if other things happen, great. And if they don't, I'll be okay. So getting people off the self-esteem roller coaster by that realization that you're bigger than any one thing that you do or that happens to you has been a real great sense of joy. And it's a great reminder for myself.
Yeah, that's huge. And it's just so deep if you think about it, because so many of us do that. We're just like,
Yeah.
well, it'll be great next week when I go to Hawaii, but until then, I'm just at this grind,
Right.
We're just always looking forward when we should just be happy where we are right now.
It's always a choice, even if you're, here's a great story to bring that to life. I was in Columbus, Ohio, working with a client, helping them on $1 billion pitch to win an airport renovation. And, we were working with their stories and making them strong, and they ended up winning, which was thrilling. But then the travel back was challenging. There was an ice storm. They said, well, you got to get out of here because the airport's closing soon. We can get you to Atlanta tonight, but not back to Austin because Austin is also experiencing bad weather. So I'm like, oh, all right, I got to figure out a hotel in Atlanta because that was not on my plan. And I get to Atlanta. That airport is huge. It takes 20 minutes just to get outside to get a cab.
Mm-hmm.
I get in the cab. 5 minutes later, the cab has a flat tire. You're like, oh, this is endless. Okay. Call an Uber to take me to the hotel. Fine. They go, okay, so a bunch of people have been bounced out of their flights. So there's one flight tomorrow, but there's a middle seat by the bathroom in the back. I'm like, I'll take it. And I get on the plane and there's a guy sitting on the aisle already. And I thought to myself, this is odd because usually they don't let people of the aisles go first. And then I realized he was blind, traveling alone.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly I didn't have any problems, right?
Mm-hmm.
The contrast was so huge. And I had this wonderful conversation with him that I would never have had all those other things not happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, what happens? I've never met a blind person traveling alone before. They usually have a dog or a person, or he said, oh, they usually want me in a wheelchair. I hate it because I can walk. And I said, I'll walk you to baggage claim.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm, guiding him, shouting, 10 more rows to the front, then we're going to turn left. And he said, you said you like to sing. Sing some Broadway show tunes for me over your shoulder, and I'll listen to the sound of your voice and have my cane hitting your luggage. And then we get in the airport, and Austin's theme is keep it weird. But
Uh-huh.
imagine me going, there's no business like show business, pulling my luggage, and he's got the cane. So we were this little parade.
Uh-huh.
And I thought, God, to be blind in an airport with the scope of the sound, the room is so big. And then getting him on the escalator like a child, okay, step down now, and then we get to the baggage claim. And I said, how does this work? Oh, I have a picture of my luggage on my phone. I show people. And I'm like, I can never find a picture on my phone. And you do it blind? Okay. And yeah,
Wow.
there's your luggage. And I get, seat him down by the baggage claim. Okay, my sister's coming to get me. Thanks so much. And I thought, that makes me happy.
Mm-hmm.
I got to be of service. And I forget all the other problems of getting home. So that's being fully present for me.
That is, and I love that story. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. And thank you so much for being on the podcast today and all
Yeah.
your stories.
Thanks, Dr. Kimberly.
Great. Yeah. So I have one last question for you.
Hmm.
What is your best advice? And you've already told us a lot of good things, but what's your best advice in living an incredible, amazing life?
The best advice I have for anybody is focus on your own progress. Let go of being a perfectionist and be a progressionist, someone who celebrates their progress. Our brains are wired for progress. That's why Fitbit works, video games, you're in the next level. Just focus on how much progress have I made today versus last week, last month. And don't compare yourself to other people and celebrate your own progress. And I think that will eventually lead to an amazing life.
Thank you so much, John.
My pleasure.
So we'll talk to you again soon.
Okay.